All right, for our first project today, I'm starting out with this piece of cardboard, and I also have this circle template. I'm tracing out about 3/4 of the circle, and then I'll freehand like an egg shape to create a body. I'm not doing anything overly fancy here, but once I have that done, I'm going to cut it out and cover the whole thing with some Mod Podge. Then I'm layering this torn tissue paper right over the top, and I'm going to build that up into a few layers, and this is going to give our body some texture. And if you don't have tissue, you could always use toilet paper, especially if it's like the cheap kind, like Scott toilet paper would work. But just use whatever you have. I suppose you could use newspaper. And so I'm just decoupaging all this tissue down. And this dried for about 6 hours, and I sanded down all that remaining paper. I'm going to paint the whole thing in the color ink by Waverly, and this only needed one coat. And when that's dry, I'm going to go over the whole thing with the color Parchment by Fusion, offloading my brush really well, and then lightly dry brushing to bring out all that texture from our tissue paper. Now with the color Maze by Waverly, I'm going to begin to make some lines. I'm not worried about perfection at all. And as you can probably tell, this is going to be a B. And I did go behind it with one more coat. I'm going to go all along the edges with some twine, just using a little bit of hot glue to attach it. And once I have that on, I'm going to take my little torch and burn off all those little fuzzies because they drive me absolutely bonkers. And some of them almost feel like they splinter, and I can't stand that. Our first challenge item is this pinwheel. So I'm going to just separate all the fans, and they're a little tough to get off, but once I get them apart, I'm gonna use 4 of these for this project, and then I'm gonna set the other 2 aside for later. And I'm gonna glue 2 of them together to form wings. So shaping 2 of them into a heart, and then I'm gonna layer the other 2 on top so everything lines up nicely and so that it's symmetrical. And then I'm going to paint them the color Maze by Waverly. And this took about 2.5 coats. And by half, I mean the last coat was just really touching up a few spots. Now I'm going to mix up the color ink, and it's a chalk paint by Waverly. And this texture paste, that's by Ranger. It's just like frosting, guys. It's so satisfying to work with. And I'm going to mix that up real well. I'm going to set that aside just for a minute because I'm kind of getting ahead of myself here. And taking this Dollar Tree sign that I previously painted in the color plaster and my school glue, and I'm going to cover this whole thing with the school glue, but I'm going to work in sections. So once I get about 1/4 of it down, I'm taking this gorgeous cardstock that I found in my stash. And I'm going to set that right into that glue, and I'm going to begin burnishing it with my hands, just taking my time, making sure I get out any bubbles and wrinkles so that way this will lay nice and flat. Now, full disclosure here, I haven't always been a fan of school glue, but after I gave it a try, I actually really like it. I will say I don't love it for napkins since they're so delicate, but for something like this, it works really well. Just make sure you take your time and really burnish it down with the warmth of your hands. I think it makes a huge difference, both in how well it adheres and helps, smoothing out those wrinkles and air bubbles. Now I got this stencil that I got at Walmart a while ago. I'm pretty sure they still have them. I only want to use the welcome at the top. And once it's in place, I'm going to go in with that texture paste that I mixed up and just smooth it over the stencil. And I'm not trying to make it perfectly flat. I actually like those little peaks and imperfections. I'm also being careful not to push the paste underneath the stencil. And then I'll lift it right up real quick and it just looks so pretty. And here I'm just showing you that I'm not wasting anything. I'm putting the leftover into this old paint container, labeling it, and then I'm just going to save it for another project. Now, if I would have went in with regular paint, I would have went back in and filled in the little gaps in the words, but where I used texture paste, I'm just going to leave it how it is. And then I realized my bee needed a stinger. So I cut a little triangle to fit, painted that black, and then I set that aside. And later I go in and put the lines on it. And then I remove the leftover paper. And I wish I would have done this first because I didn't realize that the L was up higher than it was. So when I sanded it, it removed some of the L. I mean, it's not a big deal, but it just kind of bugged me, just should have done that first. Then I'm gonna distress all the edges with some Vintage Photo by Tim Holtz. Now you don't have to distress it, but I have to distress everything. And it may sound counterintuitive, but I place this braided twine all along the sides. And you can't tell in the video, but I can tell that some of that Vintage Photo distress ink is still showing on the sides. And then, of course, I had to take my torch back out and get rid of all those little fuzzies in my twine. And then next, I'm going to glue my wings onto my bee body, just using some hot glue. And then I'll glue my bee down to my sign at an angle. I totally forgot I attached the stinger, but before I did that, I had to pull off that bit of twine that I ran along the bottom. And then I took a piece of cardboard to help give it some structure so it wouldn't bend. And then I ran more twine all along the bottom so it was all cohesive. Now to make a bow, I'm going to start layering several different types of ribbons and styles and just shape them into an awareness bow. And then I will carefully gather them up and pull my zip tie to tighten them. That yellow ribbon there I had used in my last project, and I only had that one little piece left and I couldn't let it go to waste, so I just tucked that in the center. I glued my bow just above the wings and fluffed that up and added some greenery here and there. Then I took some floral wire and made some antennas and then glued those right at the top, just tucking them under the head. Lastly, I drilled a hole on each side and ran some rusty wire through, and then I twisted it in the front to hold everything in place. And guys, I think this came out so cute. Let me know what you think of this. All right, this video is part of our monthly Just Our Imagination Challenge, and it's hosted every month by Brenda from Rustic and Lace and Kathy Joe from Kathy Joe DIYs. And this month's guest host is Julie from Small Farm Living. This is such a fun one because we're given usually 3, sometimes 4 items and get to let our imagination just take over and turn them into something completely new. So definitely check out our amazing host and the full playlist. I'll be sure to have everything linked down in the description box. All right, on to our next project. I'm taking 2 of these wood cutouts that I thrifted and I'm going to paint them both the color ink by Waverly. And all they needed was 1 coat, and these pieces are different size and thickness, so I'm going to have to remedy that using these large craft sticks. And on one side, it's built up uh, more layers than the other. And then I just glued them down using my Tite Bond Quick and Thick, and I'm going to clamp these and set them aside. Now I'm going to paint on some more stripes with that same maize chalk paint, and as you can tell, it's going to be another bee. These wood pieces were honestly the perfect shape. The top one has a little nub and the bottom one tapers down just enough, and once those stripes go on, you can really see that bee shape come to life. And then once that was dry, I just roughed it up a little bit with my sander. And then off camera, I took these oval wood pieces that I thrifted. I know you can find similar ones at Hobby Lobby, and I painted them with some watered down paint. This way, they're not going to blend into the head, and I think it creates a subtle contrast and gives the wings that slightly transparent look. And I clamped those and glued them with some Tite Bond Quick and Thick, and then I drilled 2 holes in the top, and that's for my antennas. And I'm using that same rusty wire for my antennas. And I'm going to glue those using some Aleene's Tacky Glue. I think this glue works so good and it dries clear, so you can't beat that. That tight bond set up in about an hour, so I was able to remove my clamps and just started taking some assorted ribbon and placed them in a awareness bow, took my zip tie, tightened them up real good, and then I glued that right along the top of my wings. And off camera, I made a small finger bow and then glued that right on top of that. And that ribbon that I had used earlier, that small piece, this is what I cut it off from, and I just tucked that underneath and glued that down. And that is it for this. I actually made a hanger off camera. I forgot to add that, but guys, I think this is just so cute. What do you think of this one? All right, for project number 3, I'm starting with one of Dollar Tree's ornate frames and a piece of cardboard, and I traced out the center, cut my cardboard out, leaving a bit of an overhang, and then I'm going to glue that right to the back. There's actually no back to this frame, but I'm going to glue that onto my frame using some hot glue. And so now we'll have a back. Before I go in with some paint, I'm going to add a layer of Mod Podge to protect my cardboard so it doesn't get too soggy with the paint. Remember those 2 fans left over from our pinwheel earlier? Well, we are going to paint them the color Cardinal Red by DIY, and these took 3 coats. For our second challenge item, we have glasses. We're allowed to use any kind, so I'm taking this pair and removing everything, so I'm left with just the frame, taking off the side pieces and popping out the lenses and painting it the color ink by Waverly. And this took 3 coats, and I'm going to paint the frame as well. Next, I'm painting this wood round the color black as well. And I have an assorted box of wood pieces that I got on Amazon, and this is just one of them. And all this needed was 1 coat. And now that my wings are dry, yes, they're going to be wings, I'm taking this round sponge brush and adding a bunch of dots. And I don't want them to be perfect, so I'm offsetting some of them to keep it looking more natural. And I don't know if you can tell yet, but we're making a ladybug this time, not a bee. And so now that my wood round is nice and dry, we're going to make some eyes. And so they're kind of in a teardrop shape, and going to make some lashes. And later I end up making a nose and a smile, but you won't see that until the end, I think. And so this is how I want my ladybug to look. I was just messing around with placement and I wasn't liking the wings in the back. And so it kind of looks like those bunnies that are actually backwards, but you end up making them look like their head is twisted around, like they're half backwards, half forward. And I'm gluing all that together, and then I'm going to glue my glasses down. And I will draw in the eyes here in a second. And then I wanted it to say something. So I took these wood letters that I get at Hobby Lobby and my Aleene's Tacky Glue, because that dries clear, and just writing, oh, hello. Then I'm going to paint my words using the color Snow White by Waverly. And this took about 2 coats, and then I'm going to take some more of that and just add a little detail around the circles. Not much, just adds a little extra something. And then I made a bow, just one of those. It's supposed to be a messy bow. You just take a bunch of ribbon, form it into an X, tie it off, and then I added a button to the top, add a little white dot to her eyes, and then off camera I made a little nose and a mouth, and I think she's cute. I added those mini ladybugs to her glasses. I think that just gives her some personality, and I can't wait to hear what you think. All right, on to our last project. I'm taking 3 of Dollar Tree's carrots, and I had a hard time getting the stems out. I had to warm them up using some hot glue, and then I'm going to take a skewer stick and run it through the top and down through the bottom. And that was real easy because I made out of styrofoam. And I'm going to repair that twine using some hot glue. I got these wooden beads on Amazon, an assorted box full of beads, and I wanted to make sure that my skewer stick wasn't going to stick up through the head because it would be hard to cut it off nice and flat. And then I glued my bead right over the top, and then removed all the fuzzies. Of course, I have to, right, with my torch, and glued them all in the color ink. Now, as you see, I put on those little finger covers because I didn't want to get any black on my hands, but clearly I had a brain moment there. These are on skewer sticks, so my fingers weren't even gonna get messy. It took me a second to realize that. But as you can see, I'm painting on more stripes with that color maize. And then I'm gonna set those off to the side to dry because I had to do a couple of coats on this. And then I drilled holes in the top. Of course, you gotta have a place to put the antennas. And I glued, well, I made some little antennas. I know you've already watched me do that a few times and use that same Aleene's tacky glue and set those right into my bee's head. Our last challenge item is eyeliner. So I have my eyeliner and I'm working with one of these Dollar Tree plaques, and they had some really nice ones for $5. So of course I bought several, and I'm taking my eyeliner and tracing it all along the sides of the frame. And you might be wondering what I'm doing here, but you're going to see in just a second. Now I'm going to go in with some Mod Podge. This one is glossy, but it doesn't matter. Just use whatever. And this is what I had right handy. And I'm going to start blending out that eyeliner, and it gives it almost an antique distress look. And it also creates a really nice soft border around the edges. Well, I won't say soft, kind of bold. And I went ahead and just covered the whole entire piece, including the sides, with that Mod Podge. And this is going to help seal in the wood so it doesn't just soak up all my paint, because wood is really like a sponge. It pulls everything right in. It just craves hydration. And then once that was dry, I decided I wanted to distress it a little bit. I kind of jumped the gun, and so I distressed it a little bit with the color plaster and went along the sides and just made sure that I had a nice full coat along the sides. I distressed it a little bit. I wanted to make sure that I didn't take off that eyeliner, but just smooth the edges out a little bit. And then I added another layer of Mod Podge because I wanted to make sure that my surface was prepared for decoupaging, and it sealed in that chalk paint along the sides. And this beautiful fiber paper is from Redesign's spring release. This is just so pretty. I had another one of those plaques, so I used that to trace out my paper. I got it nice and wet and then tore the edges to give it a more organic look. This took me so long. That fiber paper, regardless of it being wet, is really hard to tear. So I got that done and I let it dry. Now I'm going to use the heat method, or the iron-on method. I'm laying a piece of parchment right over my design, and then I'm going to go in with my mini heat press, and I'm going to take my time, work over the surface. And what the heat does, it warms up the Mod Podge and reactivates it. So the paper really melts right into it and adheres it beautifully. And you get such a nice finish this way. No bubbles, no wrinkles, and it's really just a great way to decoupage. Next, I added a hanger to the back, and then I took this peat pot, and I'm going to cut about a little more than a half, but not quite 3/4 of it, and I want to use the larger part of it. And I glued that right onto the bottom of my plaque. I added some twine around the peat pot itself, and then I'm taking this braided twine and gluing it right up around the rim of the pot. And off camera, I'm going to add some styrofoam and some reindeer moss. Now I'm going to trim down my skewer sticks. That way they fit down into the pot nicely using a little hot glue and then poke them right down into the pot. Off camera, I added some florals and made this little loopy finger bow and gluing that right to the front of my pot. And I didn't realize until I was getting ready to take my pictures that I forgot their wings. So I took my gingham ribbon, made two loops, both different sizes, one a little bit smaller than the other, and glued them together and then glued them back to the bee. And I did that for all three. And guys, I think this is just adorable. And that paper is absolutely gorgeous. I got some inspiration on Pinterest for this. But what do you think of my must-use items? I would love to hear it in the comments. And honestly, that's one of my favorite things about having a YouTube channel is just chatting with you guys, getting to know you. So be sure to leave me a comment. If you liked it, hit that thumbs up. And if you loved it, hype me up, and don't forget to turn on those notification bells so you don't miss another video from me. And as always, I would love it if you would subscribe. Be sure to check out our hosts and the playlist. I just know that they're going to have a lot of fun DIYs for you. Thank you for spending time with me. Until the next one, bye.